We run combat scans on every prisoner. Rank. Species. Threat index. Standard procedure. The machine spits out a number, we file the report, we move on with our lives. I have processed 941 combatants in 4 years of border enforcement. I have never once looked twice at the readout. Until scan 942. The number that came back wasn't a rank. It wasn't even a classification our system had active field codes for anymore. I had to pull the index from an archived file, one of those dusty institutional records that nobody opens because the things it describes aren't supposed to exist outside of history texts and conclave warning briefs. The human sitting across from me in that holding cell had dirt under her fingernails, a split lip, and a bored expression. The scan said she was a founder. Not descended from one. Not carrying residual marker DNA. Not a ceremonial title or a military honorific somebody had printed on a uniform to look impressive. A founder. Present tense. Active status. I checked the skin 3 times. The machine checked it once more on its own, because apparently even the machine needed a moment. Then, I did what any reasonable officer does when protocol offers no guidance and the universe has apparently decided to malfunction directly into my shift. I filed a preliminary hold report, poured myself a cup of the worst coffee in this quadrant, and I have had bad coffee. I have had coffee that tasted like engine runoff and broken promises, and I sat down across from her. She looked at me. Calm. Patient. Like she had done this before. Like she had done everything before. And I thought, how long has this person been alive? And then, I thought, does she want me to know? This is what happened next. I need to explain what a founder-level classification actually means, because I did not know not truly until I had one sitting 6 feet away from me with her wrists in a low-grade restraint field that she kept testing with one thumb, over and over, like she was checking a pulse. The conclave founders are not a myth. I want to be clear about that before I tell this story, because myths are comfortable and what I am describing is not. They are not myths. They are not legend. They are a class of human combatants who participated in the first contact engagements, the ugly, formless period before treaties, before the Bureau of Species Accords, before anyone on either side had agreed on what language to use or what qualified as a war crime. The period my professors summarized in 2 paragraphs and moved quickly past because dwelling on it caused institutional anxiety. The founders were the humans who survived that period. All of it. Multiple theaters. Multiple species. Multiple types of conflict that didn't have names because we hadn't bothered naming them yet. They came off the other side changed in ways that our biology and their biology don't have a clean explanation for. Metabolically altered. Cognitively restructured. Something in the prolonged exposure to extreme survival states, and I am paraphrasing a 600-page xenobiological report here, rewrote them at a level that registers on our instruments. The conclave flagged the classification as inactive 11 years ago. Because founders, as a category, were supposed to be gone. They were old. They were retired. Some had died. The ones still living had supposedly stepped back from anything that would put them in range of a scanner. Supposedly. Her name was Sergeant Reyes. Or that was the name on the tactical ID she'd been carrying, which could have meant anything. She was sitting with her spine absolutely straight, not rigid, not tense, just efficient, like someone who had decided long ago that slouching was a choice and had declined to make it, and she was watching me the way certain animals watch things they are not afraid of. I should describe the room so you understand the power arrangement, or the lack of one. It was a standard processing hold. Military gray. Single overhead light source. Table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs, both bolted to the floor. A ventilation unit in the upper right corner that made a low hum I had complained about in 3 consecutive maintenance requests and which continued to exist and hum despite all of them. I had a recording log, a data tablet, and the readout from the combat scan. She had the restraint field and whatever was going on behind those eyes. I had the authority. In theory. Sergeant Reyes, I said. I have a habit, my staff coordinator calls it a nervous habit, I call it a processing habit, of pressing my secondary fingers against the edge of whatever surface is nearest when I'm working through something complex. I was pressing them against the table edge hard enough that they'd probably ache later. The scan we ran on intake flagged your biometric signature at a classification that our current active index doesn't recognize. She looked at the readout on my tablet. She didn't ask to see it. It pulled from archive, I continued, because silence is not something I manage gracefully. Founder level designation. Active status. I paused. Our system apparently auto-verified 3 times. The machine did one of those on its own. I didn't ask it to. How's the machine doing? She said. Her voice was, I want to find a word for this. Level. Not flat. There's a difference. Flat is an absence. Level is a choice. Every word she used was placed where she put it and not somewhere else. It's fine, I said. Good. Machines get shaken sometimes. First time they see something new. You're not new. No, she agreed. I looked down at my tablet. The archive file on founder classification was 6 pages long and most of it was redacted, which is its own kind of statement. The unredacted portions included physical and cognitive markers, a record of the original engagement period, and a single line at the bottom that the archiving officer had apparently added as a personal notation. If you are reading this file in the context of a live encounter, re-evaluate your assumptions about the current situation before proceeding. Excellent advice. A little late. The engagement that brought you in, I said. Border crossing, contested zone, non-authorized transit through a restricted corridor. Our patrol intercepted your unit, what was left of it, at the 3rd boundary marker. I checked my notes. 4 humans. 3 survived the intercept. She said nothing. The one who didn't survive, our patrol officer's incident report says he walked into a detonation perimeter that our team had not yet set. That he appeared to be drawing our patrol's attention deliberately. Away from your position. Corporal Vitali, she said. No other comment. Was that planned? He made a choice. Was it, he made a choice? Same tone. Same placement. The sentence wasn't repeated for emphasis. It was repeated because I had asked a question she had already answered. I pressed my fingers harder into the table edge. The thing I could not account for, and I had been trained to account for things, that was the core of my job, accounting for things, was the absence of grief or guilt in her delivery. Not because it wasn't there. I had interviewed enough people after enough incidents to know the difference between someone who was empty and someone who was carrying something at a depth that routine processing wasn't designed to reach. It was there. Just nowhere I was authorized to look. The 2 survivors are in separate holds, I said. Standard procedure. I know. They've been scanned as well. Neither came back flagged. They wouldn't. I looked at her. How old are you? She looked back at me. There was something in that moment, a weighing. Like she was deciding how to answer and which answer would cost her least and which cost she was currently willing to absorb. Old enough, she said. That's not, it's the accurate answer. I let that sit. The ventilation unit hummed. I thought about reaching for my coffee, decided the motion would look like a retreat, and kept my hands where they were. I need to understand what you were doing in the restricted corridor, I said. Not for the incident report. I stopped. For what, exactly? For my own reconstruction of what I was currently looking at? For the slowly building instinct that the word intercept in my patrol officer's report was optimistic, and the word survived was doing a lot of work it hadn't been designed to carry? She tilted her head. A minor movement. Less than 5 degrees. You scan me, she said. You read the file. You already know I'm not going to explain a mission in a processing hold to an intake officer. I'm not just intake. I know what you are. A pause. You're the person who has to decide what to do with what the machine told you. And you don't have a protocol for it. And that's making you press your fingers into that table hard enough that you're going to have 4 little marks on the side of your hand. I looked down. I did. I moved my hand. She didn't smile, exactly. There was a micro movement at the corner of her mouth that I think was her version of it. The corridor, she said, after a moment, was not transit. Then, what was it? Positioning. I looked at my map overlay. The third boundary marker. The corridor geometry. The angle of approach, which I had noted in my initial read is inefficient for a standard crossing, too exposed, too direct, the kind of route you take when you're bad at navigation or when you want to be seen at one specific location. When you want to be seen at one specific location, while something else is happening somewhere else. I looked up from my tablet. She was watching me work it out. The ventilation unit hummed. My coffee was cold. Somewhere in the facility, 2 other humans were sitting in separate holds, scanned clean, flagged for nothing, waiting. What, I said, is currently happening somewhere else? And Sergeant Reyes, who was old enough, who had survived a period that 600 pages could not fully describe, who had watched a man walk into a detonation perimeter and called it a choice he made, she looked at me with those level eyes and said, very quietly, "You'll want to check your external sensors." I was already reaching for the comm panel. The alert came in 4 seconds later. 3 of our outpost's perimeter arrays had gone dark. Not destroyed. Disabled. Surgically. From inside. I did not stand up from the table. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. I had a certain professional self-image and I was committed to it in the way that people are committed to things that are already crumbling. I did not stand up. I looked at the comm panel. I looked at the alert. I looked at Sergeant Reyes. She was checking the restraint field with her thumb again. "They're good," she said. "Not bragging. Just reporting." "Your unit," I said. "Some of them." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "How many people are currently inside my facility?" "Enough." That's also the accurate answer. The thing that I would not understand until much later, until I had written and rewritten this report so many times that the original incident felt like something that had happened to a different person, was that none of it was improvised. Not the crossing. Not Vitali. Not the positioning in the corridor. Not the way she had walked through my intake process with her spine straight and her voice level, giving me just enough honesty to feel like I was conducting an interrogation. Not even the moment she told me to check the sensors. That moment especially. She had timed it to when the job was done. Not a second before. Not a second of wasted tension, not a dramatic reveal. She told me when the information had stopped being operationally useful to keep from me. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The machine had flagged her. Active status. And I had run my intake process, asked my questions, pressed my fingers into the table. I had I think honestly felt, that I was the one running the room. The outpost's external sensors were down. Someone inside the facility had done something I still do not have a complete report on. And Sergeant Reyes had been sitting in my processing hold the entire time. Present. Accounted for. Within my supervision. Giving me somewhere to look. The next 4 hours were the most bureaucratically chaotic period of my professional life, and I say this as someone who once processed a 3-species territorial dispute involving a forged livestock census and a misplaced decimal point that technically invalidated 17 years of grazing rights. The perimeter arrays came back online. 46 minutes after they went dark, every one of them flickered back up, clean, no evidence of tampering beyond the event log that showed they had simply paused. Like someone had pressed a standby button and, then, when they were done being stood by, pressed it again. Nothing was missing from the facility. No prisoners released. No data extracted, as far as my systems could confirm. No casualties. No property damage beyond one interior door panel near the secondary storage corridor that had been cleaned so thoroughly of biological trace that our forensic team flagged the absence of contamination as the contamination. Whatever they had come for, they had apparently gotten. Whatever it was small enough to leave in a pocket. I spent 46 minutes in that room with Sergeant Reyes while her people worked. I have been asked to describe that time in 3 separate debriefings, and each time I have described it the same way: we talked. That sounds inadequate. Let me try again. She talked. I mostly asked questions. She answered some of them. Not the operational ones. She was transparent about what she would and wouldn't discuss, which was itself a kind of information, because it told me the shape of what she was protecting without telling me the content. But, around the edges of those operational refusals, she was, I want to use the word generous, which is not a word I would have predicted using. She asked me how long I'd been at this posting. I said 2 years. She said the ventilation unit had probably been broken longer than that. I said yes. I suspected the previous officer had submitted the first maintenance request and then transferred out to avoid dealing with the follow-up. She said that was a reasonable exit strategy. We were 2 people having a conversation about an air vent while her operatives were somewhere in my building doing something I still don't have clearance to fully know about. The absurdity of it only landed on me later. In the moment, I was trying to hold 2 things at the same time: the alert on my panel and the person across the table, and she had apparently done enough of this to know that if you give a frightened officer somewhere to put their attention, they will put it there and be grateful. She gave me herself. Her presence. Her level voice and her straight spine and her almost smile at my table indentations. She was the distraction. She was also the main event. That particular combination is, I would later learn, something the archive files mention in 3 of their unredacted sentences, none of which I had fully processed at the time. When the arrays came back online, she paused in the middle of a sentence. We were discussing, of all things, the quality of field rations across different conflict periods. She had opinions, very specific ones, delivered with the calm authority of someone who has eaten enough bad food in enough bad situations to have developed a full taxonomy of it, and she stopped. Just for a second. Her gaze moved to the ventilation unit. Then, back to me. We're done, she said. I looked at the panel. The arrays were green. You can call your supervisor now, she said. The full team. I'd recommend doing it in the order of most to least likely to panic, but that's a personal preference. Sergeant, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at the restraint field. This is still on. I noticed you didn't increase it when the alert came in, which was professionally unusual. I hadn't increased it. I had meant to. There had been a moment when I reached toward the override and then didn't. I have thought about that moment more than I'd like to admit. I need you to explain, I said. Not as an officer. As a person. I think she heard the difference. She studied me for a moment. What do you need explained, she said. All of it. What you took. Why this facility? Why now? I paused. Why you? She was quiet for a moment. Not withholding, thinking. Working out how much to give me. There's a record in your secondary archive, she said finally. Storage designation GK7 through GK12. Do you know what that is? I didn't. It's testimony, she said. From the first contact period. First-hand accounts from individuals on multiple sides. The Bureau of Species Accords collected it during the early reconciliation process and then classified it. Sealed it. Moved it into secondary storage on 17 different facilities so no single institution held the complete record. I was very still. Those accounts name things, she said. Actions. Decisions. Agreements that were made at a level above field command and then attributed elsewhere after the fact. She let that settle. The species whose leadership is named in those accounts have been working for 11 years to ensure the testimony never becomes accessible in a form that any tribunal can use. And we came here to make a copy. The word copy landed with a deliberate lightness, the kind that means the opposite of light. The original stays. Your archive is intact. We don't steal testimony. We just another almost smile. Duplicate it into enough hands that the sealed designation stops meaning what they need it to mean. I stared at her. That's why, I said, you were the distraction. Because if something went wrong and the job couldn't be completed, you specifically are too complicated to process without convening a classification review. Which buys time. She looked at me. The scan flagged you on purpose, I said. Not a question. The scan flagged me because I'm what I am, she said. But I was also aware that it would flag me. Yes. She had walked in here knowing what the machine would say. Knowing it would send me into the archive file. Knowing the archive file would send me into questions. Knowing that questions, delivered to a person with a nervous habit and a broken ventilation unit and a cold cup of coffee, would fill 46 minutes. She had budgeted 46 minutes. 46 minutes was what the job required. I pressed my fingers to the table edge. Then, I looked at them, and stopped. The testimony, I said. GK7 through GK12. What's in it? Things that should have been public record 20 years ago. Like what? She looked at me with that level gaze and, she said, the first bombardment of the Kelhari stations wasn't a navigational error. I heard the ventilation unit. I did not say anything. There's more, she said. But that's the one that will matter most to you specifically. Given where you're posted. Given what this facility is adjacent to. She paused. Given who your family is. The room was very quiet. I had not told her anything about my family. Reyes, I said. Slowly. How long have you known I was the intake officer for this posting? She considered. 14 months, she said. I looked at the table. At my hand. At the 4 small pressure marks I'd put in the edge. Was I stopped. Reorganized. Was I chosen specifically? As the person who would be in this room. She didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because I have tried to write it out several times now and each version comes out differently and I'm not sure any of them are fully accurate. There was a version that felt like violation, someone had known where I was and why and had built a plan around that knowledge and not told me. There was another version that felt like something older and more complicated, which was the knowledge that my posting was adjacent to those stations, that my family history was what it was, that the GK testimony mentioned something specific to those events, and that someone had looked at all of that and decided that I was the one who should be in the room when this happened. Not because I was weak. Not because I was easy to manipulate. Because they needed someone who would not increase the restraint field when the alert came in. Someone who would, when a person sat across from them and handed them 46 minutes of themselves, accept the offer in good faith. Someone who might hear the words navigational error and know already, without being told, what they meant. I had known, I think, since I was 8 years old, in the particular quiet way children know things they are not given language for. The copies, I said. Where do they go? They're already somewhere, she said. The tribunal will receive the appropriate documentation when the time is right. You don't need to know the mechanism. I nodded. Slowly. You're going to have to process me, she said. Fully. File the report. Escalate to your supervisor. Go through the whole thing. It's going to be, she appeared to search for a polite word, complicated, on your end. For a while. How complicated? Moderately. You ran a clean intake. You followed protocol. Nothing you did is actionable. She paused. They will ask you why you didn't increase the restraint level during the alert. You should say you assessed the threat and made a field judgment. That's true, actually. You did. I looked at her. You assessed the threat, she said again. Gently. And you made a judgment. My supervisor arrived 17 minutes later with 2 additional officers and a very unhappy expression. I briefed him in the hallway while Sergeant Reyes sat in the processing hold with her spine straight and her hands folded, and, as I discovered when I came back, she had apparently, at some point, fixed the ventilation unit. I don't know how. The restraint field had been active the entire time. The unit was simply quiet when I returned. She shrugged when I looked at it. It was just a calibration issue, she said. The previous intake officer probably started the first maintenance request and, then, didn't finish it. Left something half adjusted. You fixed our ventilation unit, I said. It was bothering me. The classification review took 19 days. I want to give you that number cleanly so you understand the scale of what a founder-level flag initiates in the current bureaucratic structure, which was designed, and, I believe this is intentional, not accidental, to be slow enough that the operational moment passes before any decision is required. 19 days. 7 separate review bodies. A 2-day hold while someone located the original archive index for founder class designation, which had been misfiled in a subcategory labeled historical anomalies, non-active, presumably by the same person who thought sealing 20 years of first-hand testimony was a tidy solution to inconvenient history. During those 19 days, Sergeant Reyes remained in the facility. She was not in the processing hold that became untenable after day 3 when 3 separate review bodies decided they needed to send observers, and the room had 4 chairs, none of which were enough, all of them still bolted to the floor. She was moved to a secured residential hold, which was a slightly larger room with a slightly better light source and, I verified, a ventilation unit that was already functioning correctly. I was still the primary officer on her case. Nobody transferred it. I think what happened was that every person who might have transferred it looked at the active founder classification, looked at the 7 review bodies, looked at the redacted archive file, and quietly decided that the documentation chain stopping with me was the cleanest outcome for everyone's career. I went to see her on day 4. Officially, to conduct a supplemental intake record. Unofficially, because the GK7 designation was sitting in my head like a splinter and I did not have enough information to either extract it or stop noticing it. She was reading an actual physical document old enough that the material was something I didn't recognize on sight. She set it down when I came in, which I noted, and folded her hands on the table in a way that I recognized by now as her at-rest position, which looked like other people's formal positions. The review is going slowly, I said. Reviews do, she said. 7 bodies is unusual. So is the classification. I sat down. I had brought my coffee. I'd started making it from a private source after the incident, the facility dispenser, and I had developed irreconcilable differences, and I set it on the table between us like a peace offering, or a prop, or both. I accessed the GK7 records, I said. She looked at me. Through official channels, I added. My supervisor authorized a read-only pull for supplemental case context. It took 8 hours to get the authorization and the file took another 4 to decrypt. I paused. I read GK7 and GK8. She waited. GK9 was still sealed at a level above my access. Yes, she said. But 7 and 8 were enough to understand what you told me. The first bombardment. The navigational error. I looked at my hands. My mother's posting was the Calgary stations. She was there. She died there. I was told it was an accident. The room was quiet. I know, Reyes said. Did she know? I heard myself ask it. Didn't entirely mean to. Did she know, before, did she know what it actually was? Reyes considered me with that weighing look. GK9, she said, is her testimony. The ventilation unit breathed. I did not say anything for a long time. I was aware of my coffee. Of the table. Of the fact that my hands were flat on the surface and I wasn't pressing into the edge and I didn't know when I'd stopped. She gave testimony, I said, finally. During the reconciliation collection period. Voluntarily. She was one of 47 individuals who provided first-hand accounts from inside the stations. Rhea's voice was level and careful and, I understood, with the part of my mind that handles precision work, that she had thought about how to say this. Had thought about it for months, possibly. She knew the collection would be sealed. She provided it anyway. She said this is in GK8, which you can access. She said she was providing it for the record, and that the record tends to survive longer than the sealing. I thought about my mother at a processing table somewhere, with a testimony log and a case officer across from her, giving 47 pages to a sealed archive. Knowing it would be sealed. Doing it anyway. In the particular patient, persistent way that people do things they know will matter later, even if they don't survive to see when. The copies your people made, I said. GK9 is included. Yes. Where does it go? To the same place the others go. The distribution mechanism. I told you, you don't need the mechanism. But, yes. Her testimony goes where it was always going to go, eventually. It just moves faster now. I looked at Reyes. She was watching me with that same expression she'd had on day one. Not pity. Not performance. Something more like recognition. The look of someone who has seen a particular kind of weight before and knows that the only thing to do with it is let it be what it is. You chose me, I said. For this facility. This intake rotation. This case. We identified you as someone who had, she paused. Standing. In the matter. A reason to not look away from what the file said. And a reason to not increase a restraint field when an alert came in. You gambled that I'd make the choices I made. We assessed the probability. And if you'd been wrong? She looked at me steadily. We've been doing this for a long time, she said. We're not often wrong about the things that matter. The review concluded on day 19 with what was officially described as an irregular operational classification requiring continued jurisdictional assessment, which translated, in the language of institutional bureaucracy, to, we don't know what to do with this and, we are going to defer the decision until someone with more authority than any of us agrees to sign their name to it. Sergeant Reyes was released on a provisional hold status pending that jurisdictional resolution. In practice, this meant she was escorted to the facility perimeter, her temporary confinement record was logged as open pending, and she left. I processed the paperwork. All of it. The intake record, the supplemental notes, the alert incident, the perimeter event, the GK reference, everything that had to be documented was documented, and everything I had discretion over I handled carefully, and the case file was complete, and it was mine, and I filed it. She stopped at the perimeter access point. I was not there officially. I was there because I had a habit of walking the external corridor during my end-of-shift log review, which I would confirm as a genuine habit I had developed before any of this and which I maintained because it was mine and I wasn't giving it up. She looked back. The copy of GK9, I said. When it goes where it's going, is there any way to know when? She thought about it. There won't be an announcement, she said. There won't be a press release. It'll move into the right hands and, then, those hands will do what they do and, at some point something will change that you'll recognize if you're watching for it. She paused. Watch for it. How long? She did the weighing thing. That look. 11 years was the initial delay, she said. The delay is shorter now. I thought about that. Shorter than 11 years. My mother had given her testimony expecting the record to outlast the sealing. She had been right. It had taken 20 years, but it had outlasted it by virtue of a 72-year-old founder with a straight spine who had walked into a border corridor and waited to be caught. One question, I said. Last one. You said the machine gets shaken sometimes when it sees something new. I met her eyes. Was that about the machine? She looked at me for a moment. That almost smile. No, she said. She walked out through the perimeter. I stood there for a while. The external air had a particular quality at this posting, dry, thin, with a mineral undertone I'd never been able to identify that the facility geologist said was something specific to the rock composition of the surrounding terrain. I had complained about it when I first arrived. I had stopped noticing it some months in and only noticed it now because I was looking for something to notice. The Kelhari stations. The navigational error. My mother read a testimony log, writing toward a future she would not see, in the particular patient conviction of someone who believed that records matter and that eventually the right person would be in the right room at the right time. I went back inside. I had a shift log to close. The ventilation unit was quiet. I filed one additional notation in the Reyes case record before I submitted it. Officially, it reads, Founder Level Classification Confirmed. Operational circumstances reviewed. All protocols followed within the discretion of the assigned intake officer. No recommendations for disciplinary action. Case held open pending jurisdictional classification resolution. Unofficially, the last line, which I wrote and then deleted, because it was not the kind of thing that belongs in an official document, but which I am including here because this is not an official document, was, the machine flags what it recognizes. What it doesn't recognize, it learns. The founders are not inactive. They just stopped being where we knew to look.